Welcome to the Blonde Runner podcast with Coach Laura Erickson, where she shares her healthy living tips as a running and triathlon coach and mother of 4.
Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm excited to talk about trail running. This is an introduction to trail running. We're also going to be talking about trail etiquette, so some of the rules and things you should know. Over the years that I've coached, I have loved to give people a variety in their training. I always have them do a trail run. A lot of them are brand new. I remember with some of the groups that I've worked with in person, some of them had never run in their life before on the trails. And I think a lot of people that start running do run on the roads. And so trail running is sort of new. And I know it can maybe seem intimidating if you're not sure. And I think anything can be intimidating if you've never done it before. But there's always a time to give it a try. And I've introduced a lot of people to trail running over the years, and I've loved it. And matter of fact, I think it's one of the reasons that I stay pretty healthy, barring being hit by the truck, which you all know about that. Anyway, I'll probably have a podcast on that and injuries, and I know we've talked about that before. But for the most part, I think that variety in training really keeps me healthy. And trail running is a great thing to incorporate into your training. I also like hiking or anything outdoors. I think is really just healthy mentally to get in the outdoors. Anyway, so I really, really want to encourage you. I'm happy you're listening in. So I want to encourage you to get out on the trails and give them a try if you've never done it before. So hopefully these tips will help you. It's funny because whenever I'm doing these podcasts, I think I try to remember everything I want to share with you, but sometimes I get off and go, oh, I should have said that. So if you think there's something missing in this podcast, or that you put it in the comments, that's great, or send me a message. Definitely. We want to make sure everybody gets all the great tips. And I'm sure there are probably things that I miss sometimes here and there. And so I want to make sure we're getting that information to you. But I have brainstormed, and these are definitely the for sure things that you want to consider when you're doing trail running. So with trail running, I guess I want to compare and contrast road running versus trail running. So the first thing that you really need I don't think you need I guess you kind of need more equipment, but not a ton, really. The difference there are road shoes and there are trail shoes. I know I've talked about this before. Trail shoes I always use, even if I'm running on the roads in the winter, I use trail shoes because they're more nubby and they have more traction, even when I'm running on the regular roads. But obviously when you're running on the trails, it really helps to have a trail shoe. A lot of times they are built to withstand the rocks and the movement. A lot of them have more stability, so you're able to navigate the terrain better. So there is a difference. But if you don't have you only have road shoes right now, you can go find a mild trail and give it a try. And I will say trail running is a little harder in some ways. You're not going to get the pace. That's my next tip, I would say, is when you run on the trails, you really need to go by feel. If you're a road runner and you are concerned about pace and you watch your pace a lot, you'll find when you get to the trails, it's very different pacing. And it's a lot slower usually. And it's because you're doing a lot more incline, or you're navigating the terrain and you're running over rocks and you're jumping over a log, or you're navigating different terrain. It's going to slow you down some, which isn't a bad thing. I think a lot of people get frustrated that are coming from the road background and they're like, oh, I'm just so slow on the trail. Not necessarily so. You're just navigating different things. So go not by pace as much as by feel. Know kind of how obviously push the effort, but your heart rate might climb a lot more on vertical, obviously. It does it in road, but on trail, maybe even more so. Remember also, when you do the trails, you might be at a higher altitude. There's just not as much air to breathe, and so you might find your heart rate's a little different there too. I definitely go by my heart rate way more in trail running than I do on the road as well. Go by heart rate. You don't want to spike that heart rate, but you'll see that can climb, and there's reasons for that. So one of the things too to consider when you're doing trail running, I use the app All Trails. There's a lot of other apps out there, and you can get a free version. I've used the free version. You can also get a paid version and download the maps and things like that. But I think it's really important, if you do find trails to run, that you understand what trail you're doing. A lot of things I think that were intimidating to people when they do trail running is and it is for me too, is like, who wants to get lost, right? Nobody wants to get lost. So if you're familiar with the trail, or if you go on trails that are really well traveled, you're probably not going to get lost. It seems like every single trail that I go on, even if it's a well traveled trail, there's always these little branch off trails, which we'll talk about when we talk about etiquette. You really want to stay on the main trail of wherever you're going, but sometimes it can be like, oh, okay, sometimes that trail will branch off and then they'll meet again in a short, maybe they go around a few trees or something. But what I'll say there is, if you stay on the main trail, I think it's always important. I always take my phone with me. A lot of times I'll take pictures throughout, of course, because it's gorgeous and I love to remember that. But if it has trail marking signs, it's also a timestamp on your phone that tells you kind of, if you're using, I highly encourage you to use a GPS watch if you're not using one already. It gives you an idea of the distance you've traveled. It helps you to keep kind of, a lot of them have navigation on them. And so, or it'll map it as you go. That'll give you an idea of where you're at, because getting lost obviously is more of a concern when you're out on the trails. But like I said, go on the well-traveled trails, stay on the main trail, and sometimes go out and back for time. If you're just getting started, maybe just go for 10 or 20 minutes and then come back, 20 minutes. Usually you go, a lot of trails, you'll go, maybe it's a lot of incline at the beginning and it'll be a decline on the way back, so you might be a little bit faster. But nonetheless, having that GPS watch, having your trail running shoes really helps. And I'm a big advocate for like being prepared. So I always take a water vest. I kind of probably overdo it, but I don't think anybody intends to ever get lost. I've never been lost on a trail, but if I were, I would sure want my headlamp with me, and I would want extra water and food. I carry a small charging bank. And it's not a bad idea actually to have the extra weight, because if you've packed your pack well and it sets well, your backpack sets well on your back. There are a lot of trail running vests. I highly encourage that over a regular backpack, but you can use what you have at first. But if you have some extra stuff, especially water, and I'm a big advocate for Salt Stick product, and we'll talk about that more, and I'll put the link below. I've already had a podcast on it, but I really think it's necessary when you do trail running, in my opinion. You do not want to have cramping, but having a pack or something that you can carry all those necessary items is really valuable. Even if it's just a fanny pack for now, just put a few items in there. Make sure that you're being safe and that you have what you need. Also, another thing to consider when you're trail running is you've got to think of the possibilities of injury. It changes a little bit when you're out on the trails. I know in my area in northern Utah, there are snakes on the trails. So understanding how you want to combat that or deal with that. I wear compression socks, which I love the Lily Trotter brand, and I do have a discount code I'll post below on those. I like at least the crew socks. I used to use ankle socks when I run out on the roads, but once I've started converting to the compression socks, I love the recovery benefits and just the benefit of support that I get when I'm running. And the crew socks or over the calf or taller socks can protect your legs from the brush that could scrape your legs up. If you use ankle socks, oftentimes you can get little rocks and pebbles in your shoes, or inside your socks even. It's really annoying. So crew socks prevent that. That's really another thing. It's kind of a must. I do not do anything lower than a crew sock when I'm running. Compression socks I love. So definitely check those out. Or just, use what you have to start. I don't want you to feel like you're going, oh my gosh, I need this list of equipment. These are the things that just make it more comfortable for you. And of course, safety matters. In my area, we also have cougars, and not necessarily bears in my area. Let's hope not ever, but sometimes that has happened actually in Salt Lake. So I carry a bear bell. I also have pepper spray. So, sometimes people aren't always nice. I've never run into problems, but I like to feel like I'm safe. And I like that pepper spray hanging on the front so I can use it if I needed to. That could ward away obviously a person we don't want in our path, or obviously cougars and things like that. And I'm not telling this to, use this to scare you, but you need to be aware that there are different concerns when you're out on the trails, and it doesn't need to prevent you from doing it. I think if you prepare, then you don't. And like I said, I've run years on trails. I've never been bitten by a snake. Yes, I've seen rattlers, and I'm aware of where they would be and what time of year they're out more. I've never run into a cougar or a bear. I've seen mountain goats and stuff out there. So there's some fun wildlife that you want to see. I've seen moose, and those can be dangerous. I've seen bison. So just being aware and kind of being where you're at. But there's something so magical about being out in nature. I think it grounds you. I'm not sure if you've ever heard about grounding technique. There's actually ions that like help you and being around running water. Some of my favorite hikes in my area are, you can certainly message me and I'll let you know which ones, but are ones that have waterfall, things like that. It's just so, and also you don't get lost as much when you're going like by a river. But one thing that you've got to consider too with creeks, or if you're by waterfalls and things, is if it's been raining, you have a risk of flash flooding too. So you just need to consider those things. One of the things to look for there is the water getting milky. If it is, then there's some turbulence. Sometimes that is an indication that you need to get out of there, that there may be a rush of water coming. Obviously, flash flooding can be a very big concern, especially if you're in Zions or some of those other areas. So always looking at the weather and planning ahead. With that said, usually when I trail run in the summer, I am wearing shorts and a tank top, and then I have my backpack. In my running pack or vest, I usually carry a waterproof barrier. It either could be, you could get one of those cheap dollar store plastic, barriers, or I actually have a jacket it's very, very lightweight. It folds into itself, and it's always in my backpack. My backpack is packed, ready to go always. I always have a cooler cloth in there. If you don't know about those are great for ladies. You don't have to. And I'm kind of a big advocate for leave no trace, so we don't leave TP anywhere. But that's just a cloth that you can go potty with, and it can dry, it can hang on your pack. And ask me about that, and I can tell you more about those. Other things I put in my pack I do take tissues if I need to blow my nose. I always have a little first aid kit. You never know when you need to, have a Band-Aid or a sting bite type thing. Skeeters can be an issue, so sometimes I bring a water or a bug repellent like wipe that I've used before. You'll have to ask me. I can tell you all that I put in my first aid kit. For backpacking particularly is a little bit different than trail running, but always having a little bit of those kind of things ready. I always put some kind of what do you call it? I use rock tape. It's a KT tape or kinesiology tape. That stuff is really good for creating a barrier for preventing chafing. I use something called Go Stick that I like to take that prevents, it's that lubricant to keep you from chafing, because boy, that can be really irritating. I've been on some long hikes before where they're chafing their arms to pieces because it's rubbing on their backpack or something else. And so having a barrier like that or carrying some of those things is really beneficial. Safety pin, lots of little things, but we can definitely talk about that more. So a little first aid is not a bad idea to put in there. A skin lubricant, and that can also be used for your feet. Sometimes, depending on the hike, I might actually bring some extra socks, and those are beneficial. Sometimes you do go across water, and I usually do study where I'm going pretty well, so I know what shoes I want to wear, because I do have hiking boots that are also like trail running, kind of like hike boot trail running, and I love them so much, and they're very comfortable, but they're more waterproof. They're also a little hotter inside the boot, but if I'm crossing water, I will use those versus another or a different trail shoe. So another thing to be thinking of. In terms of like training or pacing, if you're trying to get into ultra running, obviously putting time on the feet matters a lot. Other things to kind of make, I think one of the things coming from a road running background for me and a lot of people is you kind of think, when I do a race, you don't walk, right? You run the whole entire thing. If you're getting into the ultra world, or you're maybe wanting to do a 50K or 50 mile or 100 mile or 100K or things like that, understand that you don't have to run the whole entire course. I think that's always surprising to people, but you can power hike. And recently I have started using poles, and I was really, I think in my mind, I was resistant to using poles because I don't like things in my hands. I mean, if you have a handheld bottle that you can use on your first hikes and you like that and you're used to it, great, you can use it. For me, I would prefer things on my body, on my person, and I don't always like things that are on my hands. But I did find some really great poles that I love that hook to my hands, and so in a way, I can be hands free. I don't have to necessarily hold on to them the whole time. They're like attached to me, and so I've really found it kind of useful, more useful than I thought it would be. So you just kind of have to be brave and try it. And so it's actually, I've watched quite a few videos on utilizing poles. They can be really beneficial, especially in really rocky terrain, or just give you more stability if you're doing water crossings or things like that. So I would highly encourage you to get some lightweight ones. And I'll be probably talking about that equipment even more. But I just want to throw out things to think about adding to making trail running more comfortable for you. You do not need all of this, but these are just some things that might help you. But again, don't be afraid to power hike. I've also seen other people use their arms on their legs when they're power hiking up, just to kind of leverage yourself and push yourself up a little bit more using your arm strength onto your legs. I'm sure you've probably seen that before. Let's see. Other things that are a little different on trail running versus road running, the form does change. One of the things that I highly encourage people to do, you want your cadence to be pretty high. You want your steps to be a little shorter. You have a little more control that way. Depending on the terrain where I'm at, to slow myself down, I sometimes will zigzag across. If it's a very steep decline and I have a little bit more than just a single track, I might zigzag across a little bit. One of the things when I teach people mountain biking, you always want to be aware there's usually there's a cliff or there's something you don't usually when you do mountain biking. There is kind of drop off areas and there's sometimes big boulders and rocks, but we don't focus on the cliff or the rock. We are aware it's there. We understand that, but we don't focus. We don't look at the cliff. We don't look at the boulder. We look at where we're trying to go. And so when you're trail running, it's the same thing. You decide where you're running and then you focus on that path. You have to be pretty decisive with trail running. You're gonna trip or fall a lot more if you are like, oh, I don't know where to step. Oh, which way to go? Stutter. You need to decide. And it's one of these things you have to be really aware. I don't use music a lot not in my ears as much. Sometimes I have a little 39-gram speaker. I've talked about it before. It's a Bluetooth. It's so cute. I sometimes will use that when I'm hiking and things. But when I'm trail running, I usually don't have a lot of music or any other distractions because you really need to be focusing. You need to be looking not at your feet per se, but maybe 5-10 feet ahead of you. So you're kind of outlining in your mind your plan of action, what steps you're going to take. And it's also kind of, you have to plan which foot you want on what step. So maybe there's a rock on one side, or maybe you're going to miss that rock and you want to miss a root or something like that. You kind of have to be very aware. I guess maybe that's why I love trail running so much, is because you really are immersed into the experience and you need to be focusing and concentrating and just taking it all in. One of the things I encourage too is what's so nice about trail running is usually you are hiking up to a peak where you have this gorgeous view, and take it all in. If it's not a race, right? You take it all in, stop, take pictures, look, don't be afraid to understand and learn the different plants that are around you. And I always like to learn about the edible plants and those kind of things. And so immerse yourself in the experience. Trail running is just fantastic. So another thing to consider when you're doing trails in the summer is some trails are exposed. There's not a lot of shade, and there's others that are more shady. So consider that as well. Obviously, sunscreen, a hat, sunglasses. I find when I do trail running, I do bring sunglasses. I often will take them on and off throughout. You want to be able to see really well. If it's kind of darker in areas, maybe it's more shaded, I'll take them off. In the sunny exposed area, I'll put them on. So I usually go a little more off and on. Then on the roads, you're a lot more exposed. So definitely the hat helps. Other things to be aware of. There are other areas that I know when I visited my sister in Missouri, they have a lot more ticks there. So when I'm running on the trails and things. I'm going to do a tick check when I get back. And I highly encourage that if you're running in the woods or anything. You don't want to get Lyme disease. I know some professionals with Lyme disease, and that can cause problems. So, again, not to make you fearful, but there's just things to consider. But there's a huge payoff to running out in the mountains and being out there in nature. I think it's so refreshing. So, again, I think how much water you need depends on you. I think it's always a good idea to bring either a life straw or a filter bottle, something that you can use to get more water if you needed to. You could even use the purifying tablets if you're by water where you might need to fill your bottles again. But making sure that you have enough for sure of water depends on how far you're going. But definitely message me if you want me to help you calculate how much water you need. Other things that you should bring are, I often will bring a buff. I love, before COVID, I didn't hardly use buffs. I had them and I was like, okay, these are fancy. And I know there's a lot of uses for buffs. You can make a hat with them. You can I've seen people make tank tops with them, and they can wipe away your sweat. They can also be used to soak in cold water and cool you down when you're running in the heat. They can also be a sun barrier. So I love buffs. I usually have one in my pack for any multi-use. Those are amazing. I also carry little stretchy gloves. So one of the things that I have noticed is trail running. If you go out for a 3-mile run, maybe it takes you 20 or 30 minutes, right? Or maybe 40, depends on your speed. You go do a 3-mile trail run, and it might take you an hour or an hour and a half or 2 hours, depending on your pacing. So you're out there a lot longer. I think that's something to consider, especially when you start climbing altitude. You might find it's 20 degrees cooler when you started than when you finish. Or when you're going up and it's really cold at the top, it gets a little windy. Again, if you have that waterproof barrier or a jacket that's waterproof, or even a windproof jacket, it'll make, even if it's a light windproof jacket, if it's windy, it makes a huge difference in terms of keeping you cool. When you run or even power walk, you can get sweaty. And when you stop and it's windy and the temperature has changed and the altitude is higher, that wind just takes all your heat away when you're wet. So oftentimes I find myself, I'll put a jacket on, I'll get a little chilly. Sometimes I'll even bring arm or hand warmers just in case, those little, the ones that you open and they get warm. I like to bring stretchy gloves because they're small, and if hopefully you don't lose them, you leave no trace, right? But sometimes if you drop things, it doesn't matter. They're small gloves. But don't, obviously try not to lose anything. But those are really packable and small. And if I get cold, those make a big difference. Sometimes it's funny when you run, sometimes your body is cold, but for me, my hands get a little cold. So another reason I wear the compression socks, they're a little thicker and they are nicer. I like that. They keep me a little bit more protected and stuff. So a little warmer if I need to be. So Lily Trotter did just come out with a new Silky Solid that's very thinner material. It's really great for the summer because it's very lightweight, super stretchy, but yet compressive. So I love that. Yeah, so let's see. I just want to make sure I don't leave anything out. So I think I've covered most of the things that you want for your trail running experience. Now, we haven't talked about backpacking. There are some other equipment I bring when it comes to backpacking. And we'll definitely cover that more a little bit later. So I wanted to touch on some of the guidelines for trail etiquette for the most part. I think I've kind of talked about leave no trace. Sometimes if I backpack on Tuesday or hike or something like that, I'll bring a bag with me and pick up trash because it's Tuesdays for trash. I like to get involved with that, picking things up and keeping things, you'd hope that, and I know sometimes things blow away and people don't mean to litter, but luckily a lot of the trails around here that I use are really well kept and people are pretty good. But on occasion, I've been to trails that there's trash. People leave their junk all over. And I know I went to the shooting recently, and same thing. They leave all their stuff they've shot up, and it's really kind of a little frustrating. Everybody needs to do their part. If everybody can clean up after themselves, that would be ideal. But reality is they don't. So if you can help clean up, that would be great. Or obviously, clean up after yourself. You pack out what you brought. Don't leave stuff. If you have to use the restroom, obviously burying it, you can always find a stick. That's just, to me, it's a no-brainer. You should absolutely be doing it. One of the other things to be considering with trails, and I mentioned it before, stay on the trail. We need to preserve nature, and that's a habitat, even though mosquitoes are really annoying and we don't want them on us, they're still part of the cycle of things, right? The birds and the butterflies and everything that works together, the different things in nature. So if we can stick to the trails and not just create our own little trail here or there, that damages that area and that ecosystem and the balance that's happening there with the different animals. And it's also their environment, so we need to be respectful of that. So stay on the trails. And what I like about All Trails app too is it tells you there are some trails that dogs can go with a leash or without a leash. There's some where it's only for mountain biking, or it can be mountain bikers. And it's good to know that. It's good to know, am I going to see mountain bikers, or am I going to see, most trails aren't motorized vehicles allowed, but if they are, it's good to know, what you're going to be dealing with there. What about, are there going to be horses on the trail? There are some trails, those things are allowed. So it's really good to, become aware. And so if you do go to All Trails and look up a different trail, you can look at the map, you can do whatever you need, but I really love to look at the comments. That tells you what's really going on. And usually the comments are dated. So you can say, especially if, I highly encourage people to use the trails in the winter. Just put crampons on your trail shoes and boom, you've got more traction, and the trails are beautiful in the snow. Some of them could be more avalanche prone. So looking those things up and reading the most recent comments, that will help you know what is going on in that area. And so that's always good. So like I mentioned, stay to the trails. It's usually safer. We don't want to leave all our scars upon the mountains. We want to definitely be healthy there. Obviously staying alert is really good, depending on the trail, as I mentioned. I know there's a popular trail in my area. If I time it right, sometimes if you know the trail well enough, you can know when is a less busy time, and that's always good. But we have a lot of mountain bikers on the trail that's in my area, and if I time it where I know they're not going to be there, that's better. But it's really important. Not only am I navigating the terrain if I'm running or hiking, but I need to be aware of what's coming, what's around the bend. I do some mountain biking as well, and sometimes you go around those turns and somebody is right there. It's kind of scary if it's not a one-way track. A lot of times they're two-way, so you're really having to get around each other, being aware that they're there. And I think, it's nice to get in your own little world, and sometimes that happens, and but being aware of your surroundings is really big. Obviously, making sure the snakes aren't right, on the trail coiled up to get us, or just listening to what's going on around you. Mountain bikes or other people, being courteous, of course, respecting animals. I always love to see the animals and observe the animals, of course, get pictures if I can, but it's so fun seeing a little squirrel scurry across the trail and then run up a tree, and not feeding them. That's really important. Making sure that you're letting them eat what's natural. It's so tempting, I know, because I think they're so cute, but they can carry disease too, so don't want to get bit there. So other things that may be, one of the things that is important to understand too is if there is a trail and people have there's a lot of people that manicure the trails or help with maintaining them. If there have been some logs, sometimes you do go over logs on a trail, but if there are a lot of logs and you see the trail splits and those logs are on that split, they're trying to prevent you from going on that direction, on that path. So they're maybe trying to prevent that one from being worn. I don't know if you've been on trails before where it's like a zigzag and then all of a sudden there's this branch that goes off and then it kind of dead ends, and it's people accidentally keep taking the wrong trail over and over and over and over. And so sometimes they'll put like logs or something there to prevent you from continuing to use that. So be aware if you're stepping over logs. Some of them might be on the trail, and that's just the way it is. Others might be preventing you from going the wrong way. So kind of consider that when you're on the trail. So if you do see vandalism or, I haven't seen a lot of spray paint or things like that, but if you see things that just don't seem right, certainly report it. Unfortunately, sometimes up the canyons that we're at, we have a lot of, teenagers go and hang out and do their stuff. But if you see that there's a lot of, damage and things, then definitely want to report that kind of stuff. But, and obviously fires and things like that, making sure that when we'll just go into trail running for the most part, but we can definitely talk about camping and the things with that you just want to be aware of, and we'll go into that. So another podcast. Let's see. It is like when you do trail running, it's okay to be a little bit noisy. It's not like fishing, you can be a little noisy. Like I said, I have my bear bell, and that's actually really good. If you're a mountain biker and you're listening, I would just highly encourage you to have a bell on your bike. And not a bell that you have to ding. Let it be something that like swings freely and dings the whole time that you're riding, because that is a huge indicator for hikers or anyone else, just safety-wise, that somebody's coming without even you having to verbalize. And you can hear bells from like long ways away. So it's super healthy to, obviously be warned in advance so nobody's running into each other. But definitely I highly encourage not only runners, but your bicyclists, and they do have all kinds of sorts of bells. But, for me, I didn't really have a bell for my bike. But you know what I did? I just took a bear bell that I had that was this Velcro in a little baggy thing. And I just take the bag off when I want it to ring. It works like a charm. And it was like a $5 at Walmart type thing. And so it doesn't have to be expensive, but that can save your bacon when you're having somebody going around a corner too fast. So definitely encourage you to wear a bell. Each trail might have a little bit different guidelines on what they, like I said, who they allow on the trail and stuff. Be aware of all that. But having one on hand, ready on your pack or whatever, I think is super, super good. Other things to do. I mean, I am kind of like a social person. So I always try to be cheerful on the trails and wave and say hi and be kind. And it might be the smile that person needed that day. So always be friendly, and it's just like road biking. If you drive past someone and they're stopped, they may need help, offer help if they look like they're in distress, of course, or I have many times seen people that are maybe going through a little heat stroke or they're a little dehydrated, and I usually carry a little bit, like an extra water that I can just give to someone, maybe a little bottle. So I encourage you to do that too. So salt stick I have used many times when they're in trouble. Maybe they're having cramping. Maybe they weren't prepared. Like, you are so prepared because you've been listening to this podcast, but maybe they didn't hear it yet and they don't have the right stuff with them. So I always carry a little bit extra to share with others. So salt stick is definitely one of them, and a little water. That's usually the problem with a lot of people, is they just aren't prepared that way. They maybe didn't expect to go as long as they did, or they didn't calculate how much they needed before and they ran out. So having a little extra, and sometimes you might have calculated wrong, so it's nice to have a little extra for yourself too, or whoever you're with. I find that's always beneficial. But again, be friendly and offer help if you need to. Obviously, just being friendly, I think, is a big thing. So we already talked about packing and what you packed out. I want to make sure that we this might seem uncomfortable, but a lot of times you can't, if you have to go to the restroom, have to really go. That's another reason I bring tissue if I needed to. I also bring a little baggie, like an extra zippy bag. So this might sound gross, but sometimes it's best if you do pack out anything that you don't want to leave any stuff out there. So I think it's really important to do that. I like to use those little, what do you call them? They're like wet wipes type of thing. Not a wet wipe, but like flushable wipes are really nice. I do bring some of those on the trail with an extra baggie. And so if I need to take that back out, you know what I'm talking about? the poo, if you have to go to the bathroom, if you need to take that back out, that you have a bag to put that in, or any trash that you have, again, pack out everything that you took in. When you're on the trails, you are supposed to yield to people going uphill. So if you're going downhill, you need to yield to them. Yielding to them by stepping to the side. I encourage people to step to the side where the mountain is. If you do have a higher side and a lower side, I usually encourage people to step to the higher side so they're not falling off the cliff. So you do need to yield to those going uphill. So if you're going down, always step to the side. You always need to yield to like the hikers, the runners, the bikers, and always yielding to horses. Obviously not wanting to scare those or spook them, and making sure, if you're aware of who's in front of you, you can kind of time it. Sometimes there's a little out patch that you can step on, those kind of things. But be aware of those around you, and then making sure that you're yielding to those. So other things that you want to consider also are going in, I would say, smaller groups. I know that there are some really large hiking groups that sometimes get together sometimes. Large, I'm saying like 20 or 30 or 40 people. That's a lot to pass. So if you are in a big group like that, maybe dividing into smaller level groups. I know when I've done group runs before with maybe, groups of 20, sometimes we tend to break apart anyway into a faster, medium, and slower, and a walking type group. And that's good. You don't want to travel with just such a long line of people because it's really hard to pass people. So it's best to do, if you can do groups of like 3 or 4, up to 5 people at a time, I would say that that's a decent group to still be able to pass to make it safe. Some of these trails that we do are pretty narrow, and so maybe they're single track. So kind of being mindful of that, not traveling in too large of a group. And then of course be respectful. If the trail requires that you have your dog on the leash, I ask that you do. Some people are really afraid of dogs, and I had a friend recently attacked by a dog. So animals sometimes can be spooked by other dogs and stuff on the trail. So if it's, hopefully your dog is well behaved. If they're not so much, so maybe keep them on the leash until they learn. And if it really is a trail that I actually have some friends that are afraid of dogs. So and if it's a trail that says no dogs, I would say please respect that, because there are people that are afraid of animals, and so we need to make sure that we're respecting them and allowing them to use the trails just as much. So anyway, I think we've covered most things that are in terms of, trail running and then trail etiquette and getting started. I hope this really helps you, and I hope you're not afraid to give a trail a shot. And maybe today, take a second, look up a trail. If you do all trails, you can look up a trail in your area. And again, if it looks like but they usually rate the trails too: hard, moderate, easy. Choose an easy trail. Go and just try it. You don't have to do the whole thing. Sometimes I only have 10 minutes, so you go out 10 minutes and 10 minutes back, and just give it a try. See if you like it. And if you try it once and you're not sure, try it again. And maybe having the right equipment might make it more comfortable for you too. But if you're listening in and you love the trails, then you are smiling this whole time knowing how wonderful they are, and hopefully you can encourage your friends to go too. So hopefully this information was helpful for you. If you think I'm missing anything, certainly send it my way. And there's probably lots of different things that we could talk about, but I think it hit some of the main ones and things to be, to be aware of when you're doing trail running. So hopefully you're out there enjoying those trails, and happy trails. And until next time, live well. All right, you know me. I mentioned at the beginning that I'd probably forget maybe a few things, and I did. There are a few things I wanted to touch on. So one is road ID. It's something I have on me all the time, so I don't even think about it anymore, literally. So that's one reason I probably didn't mention it. But road ID is great to have. The one I have goes directly on my Garmin watch, and basically it has my name, it has emergency contact number. You can also put a quote, or if you have a health condition, you can put that on there. So that's a good thing. Another thing that you might consider when you're doing these trail runs is telling a friend where you're going. That's good. And I also think it's really important to go with company. If you have a problem or emergency, something happens, you injure yourself, or they get injured, there's someone to help. So I highly encourage you to go with someone else. And it's still good, even if you're going with someone else, to let others know where you're going. Last thing I didn't really touch on, because this is more of a beginner trail running and usually don't go that far, but I do take food with me. I think I might have mentioned that I bring my G2G bars. They're a protein bar that I really like. I always encourage you to bring protein as well as carbohydrate, both. sustains you a little longer. So those are a few other things I wanted to touch on. And so sorry about forgetting that, but hopefully this was helpful for you. And we'll have some more great information in future podcasts about these types of things. Have a great day. Thank you again for listening in to the podcast. I wanted to encourage you to like and subscribe, and please share this so others are learning about it so we can continue growing it. You can also find me on Instagram at The Blonde Runner, and that's BLONDE with an E on there. And you can also find me on Instagram at Coach Laura Erickson, and that's LORAERICKSON. And thanks again for listening in, and until next time, live well.